Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A real pleasure of mine to introduce you to Andy Semotiuk. He is a U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer working with Pace Law Firm here in Toronto. For over 35 years, he's been a member of Toastmasters International, a non-profit organization which is dedicated to helping members improve their speaking skills and learning about how to be better leaders. He is something called a DTM, that's a Distinguished Toastmaster, the highest level in the organization. To give you some idea of what that means, less than 1% of the 330,000 Toastmasters worldwide are DTMs, but he is one of them. He's also the Vice President of Public Relations for the In-Pace Toastmasters Club here in Etobicoke. He's here to talk today about effective communication and leadership. Andy, how are you? Welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit about Toastmasters and why did you join and how did you become this DTM?
Well, as you mentioned, I've been a member of Toastmasters for 35 years now. And basically, I've been attending meetings, weekly meetings with clubs, In-Pace Toastmasters now and earlier clubs earlier, to try and improve myself as a human being, to be a better leader, to be a better speaker. To me, speaking and communications is one of the key things about being effective as a human being and in work, in the work setting, and indeed in public life as a whole. So initially, friends of mine invited me to Toastmasters meetings, and they take place all over Canada, all over the world. And I attended a few of them, but I was not really that interested. It was not a priority for me. And I sort of came in and out of the Toastmasters world for about a year. But eventually, I decided I should try this. I should become a better speaker. And so I attended a Toastmasters meeting. This was in Edmonton 35 years ago. And before long, they had me up on my feet speaking. And I remember in my first speeches, my legs were shaking and I was nervous and I didn't know how to make a presentation. And it took time, but I got through it, and it took time. And over time, I polished my speaking skills and became a better communicator. And so here I am today, 35 years later.
What's the secret to getting over those nerves?
If you want to be good at anything in life, the secret is do it. If you want to be a great speaker, speak. If you want to be a great writer, write. If you want to be a great politician, get into politics. It's one thing to sit on the sidelines, read about it, think about it, dream about it, but it's another thing to get in the game. It's only if you're in the game that you can score the points and get to where you want to go.
What's the line that, was it Gretzky that said it or someone who said that you miss all the goals that you don't take a shot at?
Right, good line, good point. So, it's like this, Brian. People say, well, like I learned how to speak. I've been in Toastmasters for a year. I've learned, I went, through the competent communicator first version of Toastmasters. So I know how to speak. But speaking is like anything else. I ate today, but it doesn't mean I don't have to eat tomorrow. I showered today, but it doesn't mean I don't have to shower tomorrow. Just because you speak today doesn't mean you can speak tomorrow. In fact, there was this Polish president, I don't know his name, but he was a famous pianist as well. And one quote that stuck with me about his life was, he said, if I don't practice for one day, I know it. If I don't practice for 2 days, my critics know it. And if I don't practice for 3 days, my audiences know it. And the same is true about speaking. You may think you're a good speaker. Indeed, many people, I would say even most people, certainly professionals, but also in general, people think they're great communicators. But the pathetic reality is they're not. And they're not because they don't practice all the time. They don't make it a point of polishing themselves, of making them better people, of continuously improving, learning, reading about the communication skills and brushing up on their own skills. You're someone that's a good communicator, Brian, but that's because you're communicating every day, and every day you're getting better. And
I got to tell you a quick story if I could. I used to work for Jim Pattison, 7 billion billionaire, 100% owns his own company. And he had this annual conference for all of his managers. And usually it was in Penticton or Kelowna, British Columbia, in February. And he invited someone he always wanted, Bob Hope. And it took him 3 years to actually get Bob Hope to agree to come to his conference of, 250 managers in Penticton, BC. And he sent the private jet down, and Bob Hope came up. And this was, he was actually on, I think it was the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Board. And that's how he connected up with Bob Hope. And that's the kind of influence he needed to get Bob Hope to agree to come and speak to this managers conference in Penticton, BC in the middle of February in Penticton. And then he was walking through the hotel, and he saw Bob Hope up on stage Saturday afternoon practicing his lines, practicing his jokes, practicing the entrance to the stage, the getting off the stage and all this kind of stuff. And he went up to Bob Hope and he says, "You didn't even want to come here. You didn't know who Jim Pattison was. You had no idea where Penticton, BC was. You told me the last thing you wanted to do was to come speak to a couple of, managers for a company you never heard of in the middle of February in Penticton, BC. Why are you practicing like this? Last night you were in Madison Square Gardens. Why are you practicing like this?" And he said, "Jimmy, if Bob Hope is on stage, whether he's on stage in Madison Square Gardens in front of 20,000 people or in front of 200 people in Penticton, BC, Bob Hope is going to be the best Bob Hope could possibly be. And that's why I practice every single time before every single show."
Wow. Yeah. It's a good story. I have a story for you that reminds me of a story that I have to share with you. It's a story about Og Mandino, who was a great speaker, and I had the great pleasure of meeting him. I shook his hand and introduced myself, but I attended speeches that he gave, one in particular in Orlando, but it's his life story that's so moving. I'd like to share it with you as well. He grew up before the war, World War II. His mother was an Irish, his name was Augustine, but he called himself Og. He was Irish. His mother always taught him that, Og, one day you're going to be a great writer. You study, you work hard, and one day you'll be a great writer. And so when he went to school and through his high school and so on, he wrote essays and everything like that, thinking that one day he'd be a great writer. And he signed up for college, but just then the war broke out. And so he quit college, joined the army, and went overseas to fight in World War II. Actually, he was a bombardier, and he was in the same squadron that the famous Hollywood actor Jimmy Stewart was in. And he ran 30 bombing missions over Germany during the war. When the war was over, he came back, and he looked for work, but there weren't many people who wanted to hire retired bombardiers with a high school education. So he had a hard time of it, but he got a job selling insurance. And soon enough, he married and they had a child, and he was working hard, and he worked for 10 years trying to sell insurance. But he sank further and further in debt. He just wasn't doing well, to the point where his marriage broke up after he started drinking. And he drank until he ended up pretty much in the ditch. And one day he was in Cleveland, and he's walking by a store in this hapless life, and he looked into a window and he saw a gun for sale. The gun was for $29. And he reached into his pocket and he had 3 $10 US bills in the pocket. And he thought to himself, why don't I just buy that gun and put an end to this hapless life of mine? But something moved him not to do that. And he continued on. It was a cold October or winter's day. He ended up in the library and he started reading self-help books. And over time, he came across a book by W. Clement Stone called Success Through a Positive Image, Positive Image. And he read that book and he was so moved by it that he decided he would search out W. Clement Stone and see if he could go to work for him. And Stone had an insurance company, and he Augmandino joined that insurance company as a salesman, and he started selling insurance. And over time, he started writing a newsletter for the company. And things started looking better. He got remarried to a girl that he eventually ended up living with for 40 years. And he rose and became the editor. Ultimately, W. Clement Stone put him in charge of Success magazine and became a famous writer. And ultimately, he wrote the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World. And that book sold hundreds of millions of copies, to the point where when I saw him back 30 years ago on stage, it was selling 100,000 copies a year, that book. It's a very moving story about life and, picking yourself up and getting somewhere, doing something, changing your life, improving yourself, along the lines of what we're talking about.
Well, it was, I guess, the positive self-image, but then undoubtedly connecting up with Mr. Stone, that undoubtedly helped him get his career back on track with the new insurance company. And so it's probably got some combination of the social interaction with Stone, and then his persistence and resilience and that positive image.
Yeah. I'd like to mention, just a couple of thoughts on becoming an effective communicator.
Okay, let's do that. But we're going to take a break for some messages first. We're chatting tonight with Andy Semotiuk, who is a lawyer with Pace Law Firm in Etobicoke. He's an expert on speaking, on presentations. He's, what's it called with Toastmasters you are?
A DTM, Distinguished Toastmaster.
A DTM, a Distinguished Toastmaster. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Andy and find out how you can become a DTM and what are some of the keys to being an effective presenter. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about effective communication, speaking, presenting skills with Andy Semotiuk, who is a lawyer with the Pace Law Firm in Etobicoke. He's been a lawyer in immigration law and a whole bunch of other things for numerous years. And we'll do some more shows with Andy because he's an expert in so many areas of the law. But he's also a distinguished Toastmaster, the highest award Toastmasters provides. And he wants to share with us some ideas on how you effectively present. Tony, Andy, what are some of the secrets of effective presentations?
Well, it's okay, Mike. I mean, Brian.
Sorry.
What? No problem. One of the things is humor. And let me share a humorous story just to give you an idea. I'm thinking about one in particular that I like. So there was this lady, and she bought herself a parrot. And she brought him home, and she was training this parrot how to talk. And, people would knock at the door. So the first thing that she was training him to say was, who is it? So the parrot pretty soon caught on to that. Who is it? Who is it? And then just one day she decided she's going to go get some groceries. So she went shopping. And just when she left, as she was gone, a man came to the door and knocked on the door. And the parrot said, well, who is it? And the man said, it's the plumber. And the parrot said, well, who is it? And the man said, it's the plumber. And the parrot said, who is it? And this went on until the man was so exasperated that he fainted. And then the woman came home. She opened the door, and there's a man lying there on the doorstep. And she says, oh, my goodness, I wonder who is it? And the parrot says, it's the plumber. That's a little joke, a little fun. And humor is a key thing to effective speaking. If you can do it right, not every joke works. You can't have off-color humor. Today's audiences are sensitive. You have to be careful to fit the joke to the audience. But one of the keys why humor works so well is it's an instant connection between the speaker and the audience. It's an emotional connection. It opens the door immediately. It puts the audience at ease, particularly if it's done at the beginning of a speech. But woe be to you if you don't do the humor right at the beginning of a speech, because your whole presentation will go
downhill from there.
Yeah, so it's got to be a good joke. How do you know if it's a good joke? Well, you got to try it out on people. You know, try it on your wife or your kids or your mother, father, whatever. Try it out a few times until you get really comfortable with it, and it draws a good laugh. I spoke with some of the comedians that are constantly in the business of. In fact, I did some stand-up comedy myself in Los Angeles back in the day. And
really, you did stand-up comedy? That's fantastic.
Yeah, sure. I was. There was a place called the Ice Palace in Pasadena. I was there a few times in their annex. And one of the great things about being a stand-up comic is you also get to see others perform. And some of the most hilarious guys that I've ever seen performed in the evenings I was there. There's one girl there who was with a guitar, and she put together a medley of songs based on Mexican fast food restaurant names like Taco Bell, Big Taco, and she sang. It was just hilarious. There's a guy there who was doing fake magic, which was he would pretend that he was doing a joke and then blow the joke on purpose. So an example would be that he would ask the audience to call. He'd take a napkin, put it over his hand, and ask the audience to call out a number between 1 and 5. So they'd call out 3. So he'd stick up 3 fingers under the napkin, and then he'd pull the napkin off with 3 fingers on it, pretending that this was a joke. To me, that was hilarious. I fell over backwards laughing at that kind of stuff. But anyway,
I've been to numerous stand-up comics in bars, restaurants, clubs, etc. And my sense that versus the typical joke in a speech, most stand-up comics are off color and very sexist and using incredibly coarse language that there's no way you could survive in a typical speaking scenario, speaking, joking, talking like that.
You're right about that. I mean, I've done some stand-up comedy here in Toronto at Yuck Yucks and so on. The later it gets and the more beer there's consumed and so on, the more the sort of conversation degenerates. But I don't necessarily I don't think comedy has to be crude or vulgar. I don't think using obscenities makes comedy that much better. I'm of a school that is, now maybe I'm more what's a Puritan or what, I don't know what you want to call it. Like I don't take offense. If you want to swear, go ahead and swear at Yuck Yucks. But I admire those people who use comedy, but are not, shall we say, don't use the crutches of obscenities and vulgarity to get humor across. Some audiences need that; they love that, and I'm okay with it. If that's the way it is, that's the way it is. My daughter, who also does or has done some stand-up comedy, taught me long ago. He says that you don't belong in a comedy club because like you're making the point that my daughter made, which is the audiences there aren't ready for someone who comes up with just without a few obscenities here and there sprinkled through.
With non-vulgar jokes. It doesn't. It's not the right outfit. So, what are some of the keys other than comedy to great speeches?
Okay, here's a key idea that I think most speakers do not know. The spoken word is different than the written word. In my view, you don't write a speech and think that a written speech is going to be a great speech. The difference
What's the difference between a written speech and a spoken speech?
I'll tell you. when you're trying to write a speech and give it to an audience, it's like reading something in German to an audience and then wondering, well, why don't they understand? Or, why isn't it going over? The ideas are right. The tone is right. I'm delivering it well. Why isn't it going over? Well, it does go over. I mean, people do. Okay, it's not quite German in English. I mean, people understand the written word. But if you want to be an effective communicator, or shall I say maybe a great communicator, you've got to try to be more than just connecting at the intellectual level, word for word.
Yeah.
You have to touch people in the heart or in the emotions to really be effective. So these stories, the story I talked about, Og Mandino, about, it has the component, the emotional component, that I think makes that story a great story. The key, I mean, we can connect at three levels. One is the intellectual, the other is the emotional, and the other is the spiritual. Like what you're trying to do with the great communication sort of goal is to connect, is in a sense to get a sense of communion with your audience, where you are speaking heart to heart, your heart to the audience's heart. And let me give you an illustration.
That's a really powerful word, communion with your audience. And
Yeah.
that's a religious word most often. Explain to me what you mean by communion with your audience.
Well, I'll give you an illustration that I think will make the point. When I wanted to propose to my wife, I didn't write out my speech, pull out a text and, sitting with her, read from the text, and, I love you, I want to marry you, etc. I spoke from my heart to her heart. The words were secondary. It was the thoughts, the thinking, and the emotions that I expressed that made it possible for me to persuade that woman to marry me and live with me, have children with me, and so on. That's a level of communion, and a communion. I mean, it's the deepest level of communication between people, and that's what you have to, that's what you have to try for. Meaning, at the very least, touch them at the emotional level. Get to them at the emotional level, which you can do through anecdotes, humor, through stories, through spectacular things that you might do that would create, like fear or envy or jealousy. These kind of emotions might.
There's a great speaker that I really respect. His name is Michel Nuret. He runs something called Mo Mondays, and he has a belief that everyone has a signature story. And it's that signature story that they have to figure out what it is that's taught them whatever lesson or, guided them on their way. And that you then need to explain in your speech, that signature story. And that's what is that emotional connection that creates that communion, that connects that, I want to listen to this person now because they've grabbed me. And for Og Mandino, the signature story would be the fact that he went from rags to riches.
I have such a story. It's a little bit long, though. It's about 10, 15 minutes long, but I could share that with you. It's a story about I ran in the course of my life. I was caught in a very embarrassing situation that led me to struggle. And
so you agree with that idea that having a signature story is helpful?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
but
so
I guarantee you this: if it's a signature story without emotion, it's not a signature story.
Right. Right. If it's a signature story that's not hard to tell, is one of those things that Michelle also spoke about. That if it's easy to tell, then it's not really that impactful.
Right. I don't know if you've ever heard the speaker Les Brown, but he has a signature story about how he became a radio host. When the guy who was the radio host in the radio station was drunk, and the owner phoned in and said, who's there? And Les Brown was the only other guy there. And he says, okay, Brown, I want you to get on the phone, on the microphone and, get this guy out of the studio and do whatever you have to do to carry the show through, And once he sat down, that was it. He was a radio announcer from then on.
Well, let's come back to the signature story in a second, but I think that it's a great idea to create that emotional connection with people. But you said people had to connect intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. How do you connect spiritually?
Well, first of all, not everybody believes in spiritual, the spiritual world. So, I mean, I have to be sort of cognizant of that and respectful of that. But some of the great writers, I don't remember who it was. It might have been the guy who wrote the 7 Habits of Stephen Covey, I think, might have been one of them that said that we are spiritual. Oh, it's Deepak Chopra. We are spiritual beings living a human experience, meaning that there's something greater than us, that we're, that our lives don't end with death, that there's something that we go to beyond death.
Okay.
If you
and a fascinating idea, but how do you connect with people spiritually in a speech?
Well, I believe the answer is through the emotions, and then through, there's logic involved as well. But I don't think you can get through to the spiritual world without going through the emotions. But then this level of communion is when two people feel like they are brothers or sisters, or brother and sister. That's that level of understanding. It's a sense that you know the person so well that they might as well be a family member of yours. And I guess the only way to do it is to be totally open yourself, to not only share your strengths, but also with modesty, share your weaknesses. Be open and transparent with your audience. And through that, they get a sense of credibility. They feel a sense of, this person, in sharing something that is maybe uncomfortable, and my signature story does that, by the way, it discloses vulnerability, and vulnerability is a key to the open door that you need to have in order to reach this sense of communion that I'm talking about.
We're chatting tonight with Andy Semotiuk, who is an expert at speaking. He's a distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters. He's a lawyer here in Etobicoke. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Andy in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. We're chatting tonight about effective communication, effective speaking with Andy Semotiuk. He's a lawyer in Etobicoke, does immigration law and a bunch of other things with Pace Law, but he's also a distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters International, and it's an organization that helps people learn how to speak effectively. Andy, let me ask you a couple of questions, if I could. How do you get over saying all the time?
That's one of the things in Toastmasters meetings, that we have a person tracking. He's called a grammarian. So every time you say he marks it down or she marks it down. And then when we're giving feedback, we tell the person, listen, that you used the 13 times during the course of your speech. Prime Minister Trudeau is a disaster when it comes to ums. He sprinkles them through every speech that he gives. And for that reason, he scores negative marks in terms of being an effective speaker. A thing that we used to do at Toastmasters is at one time a guy brought in a cowbell, and every time during the course of the meeting someone said the word he rang the cowbell, and you'd be amazed at how quickly people realize,
better stop,
stay away from those words. So you have to practice, and over time you get over it. I'll tell you this: if you really are dedicated to the ideas you're sharing, you won't use and ah very often. It's only when you're uncertain or you're a little afraid of what you're saying or whatever that the ums and ahs come in.
Where do you look when you're speaking to an audience? Do you have any secrets on that?
Yeah, well, generally, you want to have eye contact, and it's impossible to look at everybody all the time. So you might just pick a few people in the audience that seem to be friendly to you and make sure you keep your eye contact kind of sprinkled around the room. There's this saying that if you're afraid or you're sort of nervous, think of your audience naked sitting there, and that should kind of relax you. You could do that with eye contact, sort of, humorously think, these guys are all naked, and here I am looking at them all.
I had a great conversation with a bishop in Toronto that was renowned as being a very good speaker, and obviously had to go and make speeches and addresses. Actually, it wasn't a bishop; he was a cardinal. I apologize. And what he said, which was really quite interesting, is he said what he does is he always looks for the oldest and the youngest person in the audience because he wants to recognize them, and that's a really good way. And people don't mind it and feel excluded if you recognize the oldest person and the youngest person in the audience. They understand that those people are special and deserve to be recognized.
That's
the other
clever.
thing that he said is that always look at the second or third last row. And the reason why in the main level, and he said the reason why is because if you look at people in the front row or the second row, then you're going to be looking down at people, and the vast majority of people are going to see your forehead all through the speech. And while that might be easier to make personal contact with someone up front, which you may want to do at some point in time, don't do it all the time, because then you're going to be looking down on people. And then he said the other thing is don't always look at the people in the balcony, because then you're looking down your nose at all the people in the main level. But if you look at the second to third last row, then your eyes are always at the right spot. And if anything, frankly, you're a little bit tilted up, and so that the spotlight shining from above will shine on your face and light up your face and make you look like you've got that it factor. And then
Clever.
the final,
Keep going.
then another thing that he said, which I really liked, is that you always want yourself to go in ahead of time, or have an advanced person or a friend or someone like that go in ahead of time, so that you can get a read of the audience and understand what they're all about. Are they anxious? Are they tired? Have they had enough of the speeches? And so that this idea about making sure that you read your audience, he said, you can't just read your audience in the middle of the speech. You got to get a sense of that audience ahead of the speech. And he said, if you walk down, the front of the audience or the congregation or the group of people you're speaking to, or down the side aisle, and you meet a couple of people, you chat with them a little bit. Number one, those will be the people you make eye contact with later on. Number two, you might get a really good story. But number three, you'll get a great sense of who the audience is, what the read of the audience is. So, do I have to be quick? Do I have to be slow? Are they bored? Do I have to get them all excited, etc.? I thought those were some pretty good suggestions.
Excellent. Also, when you're making a point, it's valuable to stay focused on one individual when you're delivering a key point, not wander around with your eye contact at that moment. Deliver it to specific individuals in the audience as you make key points. It's helpful.
Is it good to stand still or move?
Well, you should move if you can, but you have to be careful about not throwing your speech because of the movement. Like if you're pacing back and forth like a crazed animal, that doesn't help us very much. A useful tactic that you can use also is you can call someone up from the audience and take a part of your presentation as a one-on-one with the person that you've got up and from the audience. And why that's so priceless is the audience identifies with the person that you've called up. So in speaking to that person, you're indirectly,
speaking everybody.
Vicariously, yeah. You have to be careful about what you're doing. You don't want to put them down or anything, but you're vicariously speaking to the entire audience, and they feel a part of you being on the audience, on the sort of podium with you. They feel a closeness to you because of it.
Take up notes, take up a written transcript, take up cue cards, or take up nothing.
Well, this is back to this German-English analogy and this thing about my proposal to my wife. I don't believe in writing speeches. I believe in organizing ideas and putting them in the right order and trying to remember that order. I like to use sort of memory techniques to remember, like A, B, C, D. A is for Apple, B is for, Bob, C is for Carol, as I'm going through my speech, using techniques like that to remember the order of the ideas. Now, I'm not against writing a speech, but I'm against writing a speech thinking that what you're going to do is take the text up to a microphone and read it to everybody.
Yeah, I think the
That's
worst thing someone
tragic.
can do is read a whole speech from a written text. I believe in writing down my ideas, I guess comparable to what you've described, and I often do that in point form, in big font, and I often will bring it to a podium or have it in my chest pocket. And I find that if I've got some of those points nearby, the chance that I forget where I am and or look goes down. And so it's when I don't have something written down that I forget, and or I've got to look for something to remind me. But when I've got it there, I actually don't look at it. It's just this comfort of knowing that it's there. And the fact that it's in point form helps me, because if I do desperately need the reminder, I can quickly gather where I am.
I know you as a good speaker, and I've seen you speak. And one of the things that you do well is the PowerPoint presentations. But a key thing about the PowerPoint, and you know this, is it can't overwhelm your speech. You're not, the PowerPoint is not your speech. The PowerPoint is an assistant to you, who is the speaker. You're the main event. The PowerPoint is sort of a sideshow. If you use PowerPoint as a sideshow just to kind of reiterate or emphasize ideas, even with pictures, that's helpful. But don't ever allow the PowerPoint to take over your speech and you become the sideshow.
The
you
lines that I like on that, have you ever heard the Moses rule?
No, what's that?
Well, this is a rule for PowerPoints, which I like, which is if 2 tablets, 10 points, and each point is maximum of 7 words, except for 2 that were 10 words each. And that was good enough for Moses. That's good enough for you.
That's a great story. That's great. Yeah.
The other one I like is the 20-20-20 rule. Do you know the 20-20-20 rule?
I don't think I do. No, what
maximum
is that?
20 pages, 20 words per page, and 20-point font.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Sometimes I will use cards if I appreciate that in some occasions you do have to have a written speech. Like if you're the Minister of Finance and you're giving a speech about the budget, it's going to be hard to give an emotional speech to your audience. Like you're going to have some written material. I acknowledge that. And there are moments when that is appropriate. But beware you lose, like if there's no humor in that speech or no anecdote or no story or whatever, beware, because the audience will fall asleep on you in the middle of, the second page.
Andy, the most important question, I think, is can anyone become an effective communicator, or do you have to have the gift of the gab to be an effective communicator?
Good question. I believe everybody has the power to be a great, effective communicator, and perhaps even a great communicator. But it's not going to be just wishing, praying, and kind of thinking about it. It's one of these practice makes perfect scenarios. And I urge people, consider Toastmasters. It doesn't have to be not everybody's a Toastmaster. You could be an actor maybe and become a great communicator, or broadcaster, or teacher, for example. But I urge people to study it, not just, it's not only practice, it's also, you got to read about it, watch other people, learn from other people. And a great place to do that is in a Toastmasters club, such as the one I belong to.
If people want to check out Toastmasters or your Toastmasters club, how do they do that?
Google, in my case, my club, Google in-pace, which is an abbreviation for investors and PACE, the 2 main organizations that formed our club, in-pace Toastmasters Club, and you'll find us, or Toastmasters International, and you can find a club anywhere near you by going to that site.
I've had the privilege of speaking both to your in-pace Toastmasters Club, which was a wonderful experience, but then you had a big year-end gala, I think it was, and I got to spoke to that event, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that, and I got to speak on the concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese concept. I really enjoyed that opportunity, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Your speeches were well received. I'll tell you that. And in fact, I was happy to come on this program because you were here, because I know you well as a good speaker.
Well, we're going to take a break for some final messages, and then going to come back with Andy for one last time, and I'm going to ask him to give us a shortened version, albeit shortened, of his signature speech. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Andy Semotiuk. He is a lawyer with Pace Law Firm in Etobicoke. He's also a distinguished speaker, distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters, and he's been telling us a little bit about effective communication. And one of the things that Andy and I talked about is that you have to have a signature story, or it's very helpful to have a signature story. And Andy, you said you might share a shortened version of your signature story with us. Could you please?
Sure. Many years ago, I lived in Los Angeles. I was practicing law in Los Angeles. And one weekend, when my family was up in Canada, I was alone. So I decided I'd go see a film. So I went to the local movie theater in Pasadena and checked out when the films were playing. And I found a film that started at 8 o'clock. I looked down at my watch and it was only 6 o'clock. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Well, I was tired, and I thought, I know, I'll get in the car, drive down to the Rose Bowl, which was in the area, and park myself somewhere remote and, just catch some shut-eye for a couple of minutes. So I drove down there, parked in a lot, tried to sort of recline in the car, but it was so crowded there. There were kids running around, people yelling. They were playing sports in on the field there and so on. So I just couldn't get any rest. So I started up the car, decided I got to find someplace. So I'm driving along and I drove under the Pasadena Bridge. Some of your listeners may know the bridges between Pasadena and another part of the city. It's an iconic bridge. And under that bridge, there was this huge parking lot with an open gate. And I thought, okay, well, there's a good spot. I'll drive in there. There's nobody around. There's maybe 3-4 cars there. I'll turn around so that I'm facing the gate, and I'll put my chair back and I'll take a snooze. So I fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was quarter to 8. It was dark outside. And I thought, just perfect. I just got enough time to go to the show. I started up the car and I looked up ahead, and lo and behold, the gate was locked. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of here now? Then I thought, who on earth would lock a gate when they saw a guy sitting in a car just like 10, 15 feet away? Like, wouldn't they tell you, so I got, first of all, I was flustered. I was confused, what's going on? Then I got angry. I thought to myself, what idiot would lock a guy in overnight in a parking lot? And then I thought to myself, wait a minute. I'm the idiot. I'm the one that got into the parking lot and went to sleep in my car as this guy closed the gate, because it wasn't a public place to be at night. So then what I did is I started driving the car around this large lot, and it was, surrounded by one of these chain link fences, looking for an exit. Well, there was no exit. So then I started thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to spend the night here. And then I looked around, and in the distance behind the parking lot, there was a building. And as I looked, I saw that some of the vehicles that were in the parking lot were military vehicles. And I concluded that that building had to be an army facility of some kind, and there were lights in there. People must be in there because there were lights. So I thought, I got to attract the attention of someone in the building to come out and rescue me. So I started beeping my horn intermittently because I didn't want the neighbors in the houses to get irritated that I'm causing all this ruckus, but enough so that I could attract someone from the building to come out and help me. Well, I did that for about 10 minutes and nothing happened. I realized, I'm going to have to somehow get out of my car, get over this chain link fence and go to that building, attract someone. I tried to climb over the fence, but they had barbed wire on top. So I cut myself, cut my best pants to shreds, but I just couldn't make it. So I fell down. I got back into my car. I'm thinking what I'll do is I'll drive around, find a spot where I can park the car right next to the fence. And I found a spot where there was no barbed wire up above. And I climbed up onto my car, jumped over the fence, almost killed myself, but somehow made it across and down onto the other side. I then walked over to the building and I started knocking on the windows and on the doors. Nothing, nobody there. It's a weekend, Saturday. Everybody's gone home. The army's not there. And I'm thinking, but these buildings, they have an alarm bell. I'm sure that there's got to be a janitor or someone in there, but I can't find it. I spent like a half hour looking for it. There's nothing there. I can't find it. So I walked back, got onto the street and walked back to take a good look at the building. And what I saw was this huge sign, but well, actually it was painted on the building. It was an arrow. It was about 10 feet tall and about 20 feet long. And the arrow was pointing at some point at the end, which happened to be the bell that I was looking for a half hour. So I went, push the bell for 20 minutes. Nobody came, nobody interested. I looked around and behind me, there was a guy sitting at a computer on his patio. And I tried to walk up to him calmly so as not to scare him, to see if I could get his help. I asked him for help. He said, well, what's the problem? I said, I'm locked in the yard over there. Can we call the army to open up the door? He said, well, use my phone. I phoned around. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. Everybody was home. You had to phone the Pentagon to get anybody from the army out there. Ultimately, I decided I'll catch a taxi. I called a taxi, went home. Next day, I came back. The gate was open. I got in the car, drove off. Now, what I learned from that story, it was like a miniature of my life. I went through all these emotions, anger, confusion, hostility. It was like, if you go to a souvenir store and you pick up one of these snow globes, where if you turn it upside down, it's a momentary picture of a snow storm falling on some remote village. It's the same kind of thing. It was, in a nutshell, that story reflected my life as it was at the moment. And the key to it was, you might have some false notes in your life, but the point is you got to run the symphony of your life and finish the symphony.
I think the lesson is sometimes you just should go home, go to bed, and try again tomorrow.
Right. That's a good lesson too.
We're chatting with Andy Semotiuk about Toastmasters and about some of the things that one has to do to become an effective speaker, an effective presenter. And Andy believes you got to have a signature story. And that's a great signature story. Andy, thank you for sharing us. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm on every Monday through Friday on Saga 960. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks.